Hello, hello, hello.
Hello, hello. Mm,
Hmm. Yay, yay, Jesse's here. Yay.
wherever he is.
Uh, if you want to look at the other pages, please do.
Mm, Good to see you all. Mm, mm. Wonderful to be here together. Michelle is wearing her green for St. Patrick's Day. See if
Of course.
anybody else is. Maybe Carrie.
One must. Hmm. As one inclines the attention toward our moment to moment sixth sense door experience, there's a way in which it takes a certain kind of courageous energy to be with things just as they are. So often that shifting to receiving life just as it is, not how we want it to be. As we've offered many times, it usually helps to incline the attention to some kindness, kindness for the resistance to things as they are, kindness for taking it personally, kindness for not seeing it clearly. It's that deep care and tenderness that makes that spaciousness for being able to allow allow things to be just as they are. That softening around and into life just as it is. So it's the awareness, not me or I or mine, that is kind. So no, it's the awareness that can care and be tender. Not mine. So as the attention settles around our body, notice if it can soften and allow the awareness itself. It's a kind softening around and then just seeping into our bodies just as they are. We don't have to get rid of not wanting it to be as it is. It's just you're kind and soften around that and into that, into things are just as they are with such care. It can be very light, not intense. Doesn't have to feel deep. Well, this is the intention. We incline toward this way of being. So when the attention shifts to knowing hearing is happening, we know the hearing isn't ours. The sounds aren't ours. We can receive the textures and vibrations of sound with such care. That we just let them be just as they are. We see there's no need to control them. And we see the thoughts about the sounds as memory, just thinking, not ours. And they just will come and go by themselves. We can let them be just as they are. No problem. Knowing the touch of body sensations, touching, touching. Just noticing the sensations in our hands, allowing for the visual image to appear, but seeing if we can experience the body sensations without that memory at times. The memory is just a thought. Maybe you can start there to feel that relief and freedom of just letting the sensations be just as they are, without identifying with the memory of me, mine, or I, through the image. And with the breath at the abdomen, so interesting, a process of just connecting there and allowing whatever appears as it's never happened before. And joining in with all breathing beings everywhere. Letting that movement totally be just as it is. No need to get rid of it or get something, fiddle with it, control it. And at times, just letting the attention follow and jump into the stream of sixth sense door, moment to moment awareness. It's never happened before. None of it is ours. If it, you notice the attention tightens around something, identifies with it as me, or I, or mine, my thought, my knee, my emotion. Just settle back, find that intention, inclination with the kindness, the softening around, the ease of not having to do anything with what appears, but connect with it, life itself. and let it pass through or flow along with it. It's just tightening, no problem. Things are just as they are, with great courage, care, and kindness.
Thank you, Michelle. Mm, really good to sit with everyone. Mm. Um, Thought I'd offer a short talk today. I know I'm very, we'll just say tired, on a bunch of levels. Um, but there's enough sort of kind of bubbling to the surface that I felt like I wanted to share. Um, most of you know that I've been in Massachusetts for the past 6 weeks or so as a kind of primary caretaker for my mom. Mm, and I won't get into it very much detail about all of it today. It's still all been a lot of process, but there is something about that in particular, of course, that um, has of the many things that it has of all of the many things that have happened over the past 6 weeks, the many strands and threads and lessons and really beautiful and hard times. Um, there is a certain theme that felt like I wanted to just talk about a little bit. Uh, Even in the sense that, like right now, the there is a plan that if things sort of stay the same or get better, that I'll come back home, to Hawaii in a couple weeks, and then if they don't, I'll stick around. And just that basic dynamic is so amazing. It's so amazing to be in a very kind of pure, um, the purity of the uncertainty, of that question that all of us, it's like you can relate to it on every moment of every experience, right? It's like, are things getting better? Are they stable? Or are they getting worse? And what does that mean in terms of like your next action and what you can think for, or plan for? Um, and the and that really we will try to predict or make plans based on like a progression of instances that we'll try to, have a feel like there's a pattern or a rhythm or something based on the past that will and experience over and over again that will help us say, oh, well, one of those three things is happening, and therefore a decision can get made. But how how of course we do that, and of course it's necessary on many levels. Um, and how fundamentally fictitious that is also, and how hard it is to live in that, and then how what is called of us, right? To live in that, because I'm sort of going through it in my little world and sort of, family dynamics and such. But of course, we are also in a time where some of those very questions or certainty about whether things are getting better, getting worse, or staying the same uh, feels solid and then changes and keeps moving. So it's the universality of it feels very important right now. I started I picked up this book of Kafka. It's like I think it might be the last thing he kind of put together, these aphorisms, these little sayings that he came up with. And this is the first one. The true path leads along a rope stretched not high in the air, but barely above the ground. It seems designed more for stumbling than for walking along it. The true path leads along a rope stretched not high in the air, but barely above the ground. It seems designed more for stumbling than for walking along it. How good is that? It's like, oh yeah, you have this idea of the true path, like, you know, above it all. But really it's this like rope that's in the way that you're just tripping over all the time. Mm, mm. This phrase, notion, phrase kind of came to me earlier on in my time here, as just that sense of like there's a situation, you make a plan, and then the ground changes, and it's like a new direction, a new movement, and the persistence of that, the relentlessness of that, um, and this idea that it's like we always have to account for the madness, and yet like the madness is it totally defies accounting for, you know. And I don't mean it's like in that well even that word it's like I know it's complicated. I don't mean in terms of mental health or it's more like there's the positive side of it. I remember my old boss would always quote Zorba the Greek. He's like I can't remember the line exactly he would say to this guy. He's like, you know what you're missing? This. Uh so there is a this positive side of it, but like the unpredictable, the undependable, the um that which throws everything into disarray, right? And again, it's like this isn't just in our personal lives. Um, it's so big, this truth. And I've been I just one of the things that I think is very fascinating is the ways in which so many different cultures and worldviews and religions and mm, philosophies, try to account for that fact of reality and the nature of things. Um, and so a lot of, different mythological systems will have that element, the unpredictable, the undependable, the undermining, uh, that which causes things to be complicated rather than settled and easy and straightforward. Um, and how amazing that the Dhamma, that it's not even like I mean there are maybe mythological elements to it. You look at the Buddhist covers and Devadatta, who's always kind of causing trouble, or there are these certain monks you hear about who are always sort of like the troublemakers who have to be kind of cause the Buddha to kind of teach a lesson, here and there. So there are these sort of like figures, of course, um, in the teachings and the tradition, but that it's the essence of the Dhamma is not just that this is an element out there or that it's something that is part of the nature of things, but that ultimately that it is the essential nature. of all things? Is there undependable quality? Is there changeable quality? Is there corelessness? Is this um, their instability of all phenomena that we can be aware of, right? Directly in our senses, um, our minds, right? So there's the direct experience of all phenomena has those qualities of impermanence, of undependability, of suffering and ill, based on that, and then that sense of corelessness and emptiness and um, instability, insecurity in everything that is conditioned. And just what a relief it is that that is the truth that the teachings are founded on, and that it's actually through the recognition of that, through the coming to terms with that, that we are liberated, and how just how powerful that is. But that we also have, it is fun sometimes to look at some of these characters, because sometimes the other mythologies will kind of illuminate other sides of it, The we spent a lot of time up in the, Pacific Northwest where the raven has some of that uh those characteristics, in a lot of the indigenous mythologies and story story worlds, of the ancient times. This kind of, trickster, rascal, um, driven by lust and pettiness, and is really destructive, really causes true harm, and is also seen with a certain amount of affectionate appreciation at times as well, or the coyote, or more in the Southwest, or, these sort of trickster beings, that wreak so much havoc, and at the same time are the source of a lot of what propels human history forward, or and and beyond the human realm. When I was in Bolivia last year, there's a there's a character um, in some of the mythology there of this a fox, Zorro Antonio, a fox named Antonio, who's kind of like this, just like a troublemaker, um, petulant, self-interested, uh, hilarious, um, and causes a lot of problems. And so there's one story about how he was kind of walking around one day, and the his condor friend comes down to say hi, Maiku, and he asks what he's up to, and the condor says, "Oh, I'm about to go to this party in the heavens." And so Antonio is like, "Oh, what? Tell me about it." He's like, "Oh, it's just great. It's like you wouldn't believe it. There's like all the food, and there's the dancing, and there's the music, and it's incredible. You really, literally have never seen anything like it, because there's just all this stuff up there that's amazing." Um, and of course, the fox can't fly, so he's like, "Please, take me. Can you carry me up there to the party?" He's like, "Okay, all right, I'll bring you up." So the condor grabs the fox and brings him up to the heavens, and there's just this like incredible party, and the condor says to the fox, he says, "Antonio, at some point you just know, I have to get back down to earth before sunrise. That's like our rule, And he's like, "Oh yeah, 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 whatever, And he's off, and he's dancing, and he's partying, and he's drinking, and he's eating, and he's just like, gorging himself on all of this like incredible exotic foods, and having this like, incredible time. And um, at some point, various points, basically, the condor is like, we gotta go, we gotta go, we gotta go. And he's like, yeah, 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 we'll be there. And at some point, the condor just gets tired of it and takes off, and the fox doesn't care and he's partying. And at some point, there's variations of the story, but he kind of passes out drunk and full of all this food out in the field and wakes up and party's over and his ride is gone. And he freaks out, right? He doesn't know how he's going to get back down to earth. And sometimes he thinks of it, other people give him the idea, but that he has to basically he has to go around and pick all flowers and all the plants and find stuff to make a rope to, to reach all the way back down to the earth. So he's making this thing, using whatever he can from around him. And he creates this incredibly long rope, ties it up there, and he starts to kind of go down. And as he goes down, there's all these parrots that start to kind of go around, and he just starts making fun of them, you know, because he's like that. And the parrots are like, "We're gonna cut your cord." And he's like, "Oh, no, 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 I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding." He's like, "Come on, have a sense of humor. Why are you guys so uptight?" And then he keeps going, and the parrots are flying around. He starts making fun of them again, like really mean. And they're like, "We're gonna cut your cord." And he's like, "No, no, 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 I'm just kidding. Come on, having a good time." And the third time he does it, they're like, "We're gonna chew on your cord." And he says, "I'm just kidding." And they don't believe him. And they just like, "Sorry, Antonio, that's it." So they, with their beaks, they cut the cord and he falls. He's falling and falling and falling down to earth. And he's calling out, "Oh, help me, I'm falling, get the stuff together, but get some, make a soft landing for me. Your king is coming. Your savior is coming. I'm an angel falling from heaven, save me." But by that point in his life, everyone down there is sick of him and no one comes to his aid. And so he just falls from heaven to the ground and dies, actually. Of course, they keep not, they die and they're still around, these figures. But he hits the ground and he's so full of all of this food and the cord that falls that he just bursts open. And that it said that it was through that before that happened, there were not all these foods. So all the grains, the corn, the vegetables, the fruits, and all of the plants that he used to make the cord, they just didn't exist on Earth. And that it was from him falling and collapsing and exploding that he basically provided the seeds for all of that goodness that we now have, you know, through this escapade. And I do think that we can, you know, recognize the unwholesomeness and the malevolence and the mm, destructive forces, that we can see in ourselves or in the world, and acknowledge them as such, and also see the ways in which what comes of things is never totally clear, and that over time, then, upon reflection back, it's very hard to disentangle the causes and conditions that lead to the good and the bad in our lives. And so some deep, I think, wise understanding and sense of it's not an excuse, it's not a rationalization, it isn't a and there's always a sense that we feel like the world would be better without that kind of behavior. And yet, it's like we see that there's something that comes from it, you know. And you know, the Garden of Eden. I mean, some of these like getting expelled. Like there are these themes of like this element of things, the undependable, the unpredictable, the mischievous, the naughty, the mean, the cruel, the greedy, these things that it's like we really recognize the harm that can come from them. And there's also something of having to understand that they're a fundamental part of the way things are and the nature of things. And the clarity of that is good. The clarity and the honesty and the not being delusional that there's a world outside of that or uh, that we can plan and expect things not to include those elements. Um, that's healthy, actually, as hard as it is. One of the one of the spring is finally sort of here, but it hadn't been for much of my time here. And it was it was harder on that level, of course, when things are just not just snow and cold, but like there was this week or so where it was just like ice, like everyone gave up, but no one was shoveling. It was just like 4 or 5 inches of just like rolling ice everywhere. I mean, just the most insane. Um, which is all just to say that I was dreaming of Hawaii and the good fortune we have for not having all of that there. But what has been there over the entire period that I have not been home has been this fog of from the volcano, And Pele is not like a trickster spirit in the same way, but there's an element there, the deity, of the volcano she lives in Kilauea, caldera. Um, but she she's like a real being, and she's a complicated character. And her jealousy and her wrathfulness and her unpredictability are fundamental to who she is and to the reality of what it means to live on that island. And so Michelle has had to really, and so there's been this like really, it, you never know when the eruptions are coming. You never know how long it's going to last. And then the sulfur dioxide and carbon monoxide, whatever all the gases are that get spewed out by the volcano, you really never know when those are coming, how long they'll last, and then the wind conditions where will they spread to. Um, and this really has been a quite hard period of time where it's almost unprecedented in terms of modern times of the volcano like erupting and stopping and erupting and stopping and erupting and stopping. I think it's sort of like 15 times or something in the past 6 weeks or so. Um, and it's that constant sense of like, oh no, here it is again. Oh gosh, maybe it's settling down, or okay, this level I can manage. And just again, it's that like and wanting to be able to predict, wanting to, you know, look at the the weather predictions and hope for the winds to be this way or that way. And, as of course, Michelle just sent me a thing about how the NOAA there is going to be defunded, so we won't have even that level of uh, predictability. But that sense of being beholden to it, that uncertainty at the heart of things, how hard it is and how purifying it is. Some There was an old translation of a sutta that I was reading from like the 20s, so the English is very different, but the end maker of dukkha, by wearing every fetter down. I like uh, that phrase and that sense of sometimes like that's what it feels like. It's just like this slow process of just like wearing the fetters down of our resistance to this fact of things, to the undependability, the changeability. And of course, then like kind of modern Western stuff. In some ways, the best examples you have are like comic books, like these comic book villains that are so bad, and they're so ridiculous at the same time. There's like this sort of strange way that is like understood to be paired together. The kind of like purity of evil and the like purity of just like absurdity. Um, that's like you get this sense of how we're living in really kind of like archetypal times. You're like, oh, this is real. This is like whatever that is tapping into something that really can manifest in the world. Um, there's the old like the original Batman movie from the 60s, where it was like you have like the Joker and the Penguin and Riddler and Catwoman. They all like take over the UN and disintegrate people into like dust or something. They dehydrate they dehydrate everybody. Anyway, you watch that and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that looks familiar. Like there's something coming through in that uh that's like true, that there's the sort of mythological element, that understanding of the the craziness of it and the real terror of that, right? That it's not what is often scary is that element of unpredictability and wildness and irrationalness of so much of the impulse and the behavior. There's something about, I mean, I don't, it's probably been 20 years since I've gone through this winter into spring thing, you know, really. And it is amazing. It's totally amazing. And that sense of how hard the frozenness is and cold and the barrenness and the darkness, how hard it can be. And then these days come where it's like the sun is out and it's still only like 50 degrees or something. It's freezing on one level, but it's like 60 degrees. It's amazing, and people just like, oh, they sit outside and it's like this, everyone relaxes and there's just this relief in the air. And just over the period of a couple of weeks, it's like, even the river was just solid ice, it's just like you hear that of the lakes, when the lakes start to like boom, there's like that the ice starts to kind of crack and make that like there's like a rubber band sound like deep in there, and it starts to break apart and you see the water and now it's just like it's rushing, the rivers are rushing. All the snow is melting. We went into the hill towns today and it's like steamy, there's still these little banks of snow and the all the streams and everything is flooding in and there's that interesting thing of like the relief of that and the warmth, but also the kind of chaos of it and that sense of the unpredictability, the wildness of it, the there's part of like the heart that can also remember of like, oh, there was something in the frozenness I actually felt safe too. There was something in that frozenness that can feel like a protection, right? A kind of the non-movement, the non-changingness. There's even if it's unpleasant, even if it's bad, there's a sense of solidity that still might be an illusion, but to have that start to melt away and crack away, but there also can be a pain in that, there can be a an agonizing element of the uncontrollability, of course, of life and the flow of things moving forward out of our control. I went to a sugar shack this morning, another thing I haven't done in many, many years, which out here and up north, in this time of year, the sap starts to run in the sugar maples. And since ancient times, of course, people have tapped that sap and boiled it and made syrup or candy, sugar. And amazing to talk to some of these, like the old timers, who've been doing it since they were kids and with horse-drawn sleds, and now it's, more mechanical, and but this whatever it is, of the whether it's just the last couple of weeks or what's happening in the winter, it's very sensitive. These trees, like it really needs it needs to get a certain kind of cold at night, a certain kind of warm in the day for the sap to flow. And if it's windy, the trees won't, the sap won't run. It's like this sense of if it's windy, the trees are protecting themselves in case of breakage, so they won't lose that energy. Uh, or like they're expecting the weather to get warmer very quickly, that the trees will start to bud, and then that will also make the sap stop flowing. So it's looking like a very kind of short maple sugaring year. Never mind all of the conditions and factors of, the climate over the past months and the fall and rain, and it gets beyond, the sort of intellect's ability to understand what causes one year to be one or another. But on the other hand, it's like this very insecurity, of any farmer would know, right? Or anyone dependent upon the cycles and products of nature, to create or produce. It's very humbling, and yet how good it is to still rejoice in what is there, sense of getting up early and standing in line for a very long time and waiting for your food and all these people, it's a ritual, it's a tradition, that we celebrate this aspect of spring that's like so fundamental, that the sap is flowing through the trees in this very particular way, in this very particular period, with these very particular conditions, and it's sweet, you know, and that like makes everybody happy, how good that is in the midst of all the uncertainty and the turmoil, these traditions. So So what do we do in the face of all of this element of uncertainty, of undependability, of rascals causing trouble everywhere? Hmm. I I was have a kind of like a project proposal that has been accepted to for me to go kind of study and explore, deepen a little bit at this critical theory workshop in Paris in July. It's hard to it's hard to conceive of July at this point, and if on so many levels, what will the conditions be? But there's a chance that this will happen, and if it doesn't happen, um, it is a little bit of like a kind of more academic side of things that I feel like I want to flesh out a little bit more and pursue a little bit more fully. So it has to do with, now don't worry, I'm not going to get into it all here. Um, it has to do with trying to take a look at like Marxist dialectics um, and the way Marx used the notion of a kind of dialectical process in historical terms, but also in terms of more individual human terms. His thing being rooted in Hegel's notion of dialectics. And where does where might there be a different way of conceiving it, partly based in Buddhist notions of self, some abhidhamma stuff, some practice, but basically trying to kind of reconsider a little bit of this notion that it was fleshed out in this very like particular way in the kind of Western philosophical tradition, but that has a lot of resonance in many traditions, right? Of the kind of unity of opposites in our lives, in the world, in our experience directly. And what is the relationship between those things, and what is the way forward? What is inevitable, and what are we have impact over? I think what I'll just say for now is that there are like amazing things about the kind of Western notions and kind of it's like the thinking, that I actually don't understand. We'll put that out there. A lot of it, it's like I don't have that training. Um, but you know, there's like here's a little quote from Hegel. The possibility of harmonization is the possibility of hostility. The possibility of harmonization is the possibility of hostility. And so you have this understanding, right, of like you can't have one without the other. That actually to conceive of one is to also conceive of its opposite. And like these guys talk about thoughts like they're real in a level that's like ridiculous, really, but they're very good at it. And I think that there are amazing things about it, but there is also a place where it can get and it can explain some things, right, about how well, when this happens and the opposite happens, and this is like the historical processes is one of this sort of like back and forth in kind of eternal contradiction, leading forward in a way that's mm, they would sort of frame as kind of like ever more leading towards a kind of finality. And I feel like the Dhamma offers us something different, and I don't totally know how to talk about it. But it has something to do with how how can it be, right, that actually in the experience of the greatest instability that we have the doorway to the greatest peace. And I just to think about how like my needs are feeling right now in terms of the world. We'll just say never individualized, but like society, you know, politics or the news or just everything, the all. The sense that like the the greater the instability, the more clear the instability, the more calm you might be, right? Is something that's so hard on one level to digest and to really fathom or accept. Um, and that it is not that it's not a dialectical response that when we see anger we do love, or we see like it's not just about that, right, that we're supposed to have a contradictory response to what we're experiencing, that it is actually through the reckoning and acknowledgement of the instability of things, right? Of the uncontrollability and the unpredictability of things, that actually we come to the deepest peace, is so profound in terms of the Buddha Dhamma, and so important and so hard to fathom. Not that there aren't times in our tradition and our practice and in the Eightfold Path where it is like, yes, there's like right and wrong and the good way and the bad way. And like, there is that sort of like bifurcation and polarity. So it's not to say that isn't a part of it, but that is also the level of that clarity of the truth of things, and that it's actually only through the direct experience and the getting the mind like slowly over and over and over again to understand and to appreciate that this is the fundamental nature of things, is undependable, unpredictable, unsatisfactory, unstable, unwieldy, uncontrollable, is so amazing. And how we still resist it at every step of the way so much of the time, that it's like we resist it through denial, we resist it through hope, we resist it through um, the things that are not necessarily pathological. It's like there is also the sense of like, yes, we also counter with things that feel like an opposite force, right? To challenge the force of what we see as oppressive. But there is also something that is distinct from that, right? There is also the sense of that, like, the more oppression we feel, the more generous we become. Like, what are the mechanisms? The mechanism of that internally is very clear in the teachings and very direct. And Um, and yet still very hard to fathom, hard to appreciate. And yet how important. And just that possibility of like, what would it really be like? The thought of like, every time you get a sense of the instability of things, that you actually relax versus the contraction, right? That's the dialectical response. In that classical framework, right? It's the contraction, it's the countering, it's the, this happens, and then so you counter in this like reactive way, right? Understandable and very familiar, of course, to all of us, right? That the heart clenches, the heart contracts, the heart goes back to wanting the stability of the frozenness, um, because it feels at least stable, it feels at least strong, even if it's painful, even when we know that it causes harm. And then what is it like to like really imagine that like, oh, the more chaos, the more hardship, the more all of these things, like the more relaxed, the more loving, the more generous, the more, like what 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 mechanisms, what mechanics, what understandings, what needs to get put in place in order for that to be what happens. It's what we're doing. It's what Michelle just guided us in. But I think sometimes we don't always think of it in those terms. Now, there is something valuable in that. And the other question that I want to explore, whatever, is like, what is there a social value in that or not? Or when is there, or how can that be considered? Because I think we are aware that like clarity is very compelling, even if it's like intellectual clarity, like, oh, we want to understand this, and we have the right opinion, we have the right view, we have the right perspective. And then you can also see how it's like clarity doesn't actually change anything. But then you also see how delusion really is the doorway to inevitability. And so, what are the other mechanics there that start to shift that movement away from the inevitability of the kind of dialectical momentum of history, of our lives, of our um, self creation towards something else, right? Towards something that's transformative in a really different way. Mm. And there is the deliberatory side of that in terms of the deepest Dhamma, right? And the understanding of like the deepest peace, but also that there are samsaric versions of it that are still good, and for all of us in different ways. And so one thing I'll just say is, there is a value, like an unbelievable value in doing this now, whatever is happening in your in your lives, in your health, uh, and not waiting until you are forced to confront the unpredictable, undependable, unsatisfying, terminal nature of existence. And even then, it's hard. But there are a lot of things that we can do. It's like, again, it's just to remember. I mean, there's the practice and the purity of it and liberation and the faith that develops and the capacity for that, the capacity for like to be relaxed amid the chaos, to be generous amid the horrors. the goodness of that. It's really important. And it's just like culture, you know, music, art. My this town, my village has this like huge St. Patrick's Day parade every year with a lot of Irish. And we are not Irish, but back back in the old days, uh, a very good friend of my parents started having the St. Patrick's Day party at his house. It was like a potluck party. And then he and his girlfriend split up and they stopped holding the party. And he asked my parents to continue the tradition on. So this is like in the 80s. And so my whole life growing up, we would do this just awesome St. Patrick's Day potluck party that my parents would just invite everyone in their world to. It was like family, friends, old friends, new friends, coworkers, like whoever was welcome. And it would just be like all day, and people would come, and sometimes people would go to the parade and would come back, and um, it was like better than Christmas or anything. It was just like so fun, and there were just always tons of kids, and there was like um, just to see people's lives. You know, people wouldn't, a lot of people weren't seeing each other all the time, you know, or it had been years since they'd seen each other. And it was like this kind of like coming back together, you know, um, and then when my parents split up, they stopped doing it. So that was like sort of since I was in high school, basically, there's been no party. And I guess I will just say that in in what my mom has been facing, it has been a challenge to maintain like a connection with her kind of deepest faith and principles and beliefs and um, that are inspiring, you know, to her. And um, so when we were at the hospital last week or whatever, I was just like, Mom, you know what? I think we have to do the party. I think we have to do this. And it's like, it's totally it's like crazy on like a lot of levels that we're going to do this, but we're going to do this. And it's like, we're just inviting everybody or who everyone wants to come to Holyoke. Uh, there's it's like we just have to do it. This needs to happen no matter what kind of shape she's in or any of us are in next Sunday. Um, because it's like this is what we believe in. It's like we believe in friends and we believe in family and we believe in food and we believe in gathering and um, you know, my mom was a she you know, dropped out of college like a bunch of times. And even in high school, she went to go work for the United Farm Workers Union in California, helping with organize a, you know, grape and lettuce boycott back in the 70s and was very involved for many years. And we were talking about this time for her of like just how important like so much of what she learned in terms of like people getting together and people singing and people bringing food and sharing stories and sharing meals and food from their cultures and food from their families and like that needs to be the core of what happens in terms of organizing, you know, in the world, that it can't always be just angry and against. And, of course, that's like an important, motivating force, and rooted in, the experience of oppression and injustice. And yet, how important food and community and culture and relationships and music and art are in the formation of the like relationships that are needed to actually make a movement strong, um, and so we're going to do this. We're going to do this next Sunday, um, and it's good, and I just feel like it's 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 still in the realm of samsara, right? It's hopefully we won't have a Soro Antonio won't show up and make a mess of things, um, as he inevitably will, of course. Uh, but still, this sense of there are many ways, that any of us can be supported by and need reminders of our own goodness and of goodness in the world and of the momentum that we're a part of, is fundamental, especially these days, no matter what's happening in our personal lives. So a little bit of encouragement along those lines for whatever it's worth, however helpful it may be. Mm. Well, thank you all.
Yeah. Do we want to announce the Burma fundraiser?
Yeah, we do. Michelle, do you want to
Yes.
announce it?
No, I think, but I'm really into it. Yeah.
Yes. Well, it's along related lines. Um, the folks who we've known them forever, this group they're now called Better Burma. They have Insight Myanmar podcasts. They're incredible. Joa McGee. Um, um, we got to know him many years ago he started doing like a really good, um, like travel guide for yogis in Myanmar, Burma, like very serious. I mean, he's a very dedicated student of Goenkaji and that lineage of Lady Sayadaw, and really wonderful. And he has been, and his colleagues and partner and friends, they've been so deeply dedicated to helping since the coup and being involved in many levels. So they are the ones who recently realized they could help us get the metadona funds back to Wachet, to the village that we've worked in for so long. And so that's actually like in the works in the next days. And we decided to do a little bit of a fundraiser together. So you should have gotten an email about it. We will send something out again. But basically, next Monday, the 24th, it's a little confusing because some of the things talk about like it's 25th in Thailand at 7 in the morning. Um, but basically, that's going to be like 2 o'clock in the afternoon Hawaii time, 5 o'clock, like this time, 5 o'clock Pacific time, 8 o'clock East Coast time on Monday, the 24th. We'll have a meditation component that Michelle and I will be leading, and then a great presentation from the team of folks who are kind of really on the ground doing a lot of work. This is they give money and spread it to like all kinds of things. This is going to be particularly for helping monastics and monastic communities that they're this network that they have across the country. Um, because for a bunch of reasons, largely because of how indebted we are to these monastic traditions for even having a Dhamma to be able to attempt to offer, um, and that the generosity that we have all like so unbelievably profoundly benefited from, um, over the decades and over the eons, to be able to try to honor that relationship and honor that reciprocity, as much as we can. And also that the reality is that the monasteries, nunneries, end up being really hubs for a lot of support and donation and stuff like in many communities, especially rural communities. So they're like kind of a good place from which to spread
A
support.
safer,
Yeah,
safer.
and
Yeah.
safer. So
And
it'll
also,
be,
also Joa's organization is needing Vipassana Hawaii to host, right? I mean, they're needing us to do the front work of fundraising, so it feels like a really good collaboration and relationship.
yeah.
Yeah,
So we really, it's, just come no matter what, even if you don't have, aren't able to offer anything at
yeah,
this
that's
point,
not it.
it's because you'll learn a lot about what's happening, and there'll be time for Q&A and, just to kind of get a sense from folks who are like really doing incredible work on the ground and have been for some years. But also, of course, the hope is to, raise some money too for all these good things, and yeah, to kind of help build that relationship. So yeah, next Monday the 24th, that'll be in um Julia. Yes, I think it will be recorded, and I'm sure you know we'll see exactly how it gets shared for sure. Yeah.
A
Yeah.
virtual potluck.
A virtual potluck. Yeah. Dama potluck. Mm, yeah. So thanks everybody. I know that was a longer talk than I proposed, but
Thank you.
yeah.
Thanks. Thank you, Jim.
Take
Mm.
care, everyone. Yeah, we'll see you next week. Aloha.
Mm.